are candidates for Ohio's 18th district in the Ohio Senate, Jerry Serino and Betsy Rader. Mr. Serino, since you come first alphabetically, you may make your remarks.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I'd first like to thank the League for sponsoring this great event. Someone mentioned earlier that it really is a testimony to our country that we have events like these. As we know, there are many countries where these kinds of events simply don't occur, and we're very blessed as a country to have this, and so I thank the League. As was mentioned, I am in an uncontested primary, so my opponent in the general election is you will hear from next, and you will have 8 months to hear from both of us, probably more than you'll want to hear. So there'll be plenty of time for that. So I'm going to use this time to introduce myself and talk a little bit about priorities. First of all, I'd also like to sneak in a push for the senior levy that you have here in Geauga. I'm a Lake County Commissioner currently. We had a senior levy last year, and it won with great support from the community. And it is money that is very well spent. And I say that not just because I'm a senior, but because the senior population in all of our counties is growing, and the amount of services continues to grow as well. So please support issue 6. So as I said, I'm currently a Lake County Commissioner. I got into politics very late. I was 65 when I first ran for office. I'm a retired medical device CEO, run a number of companies, many of them in Cleveland. I was the founding CEO of Source One Healthcare Technologies and Mentor, with revenues of $1.2 billion a year. Sold that and then ran a number of companies after that point. Decided to get into politics simply because, A, I had the time now when I was retired in 16, but also wanted to try to change some things and move the dial a little bit. And instead of complaining, I thought it would be appropriate for me to step in and actually put some effort into it, which is why I ran for commissioner. I'm a native Clevelander. I grew up in Little Italy. Many of you have probably been down there for restaurants. The people running the restaurants are probably the only Italians left in Little Italy. But I grew up in an area where education was really at a premium. And I was very fortunate to have parents who encouraged me. I was the first one in my family to go to college. And I really plan on focusing a great deal in Columbus, if elected, on making education more available to everybody in this state, regardless of where you live or what your property taxes or property values happen to be. I've been focusing a lot on economic development. I spent probably half my time in the last year and a half working on what became House Bill 6, which was a bipartisan bill passed to keep our nuclear plants open in Ohio, particularly focused on Perry, which is the lifeblood of our economy in Lake County. And it was a great, not only bipartisan effort, but it was also an effort of myself and other Republicans working with labor unions to try to protect the economic interest, as well as the clean energy production in Lake County. I was happy to do that, and we thank everybody who supported House Bill 6. Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. I plan on doing a lot of good, hard work for all of you in Columbus, and thank you for your time and attention tonight. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Serino. No, that's all right. Thank you, Mr. Serino. Ms. Rader.
Hi, I'm Betsy Rader. Thanks so much for being here. My husband and I live in Russell Township. Our 3 kids went to the West Geauga Public Schools, but I was born in Appalachian, Ohio. My mom was a single, divorced mother of 4, getting by on minimum wage jobs, and we were poor. Fortunately, back then, the public universities were affordable enough that you could work your way through college. So I went to Ohio State, graduated in 3 years, first in my class, and I was able to get a full scholarship to Yale Law School. I wanted to be a lawyer because I saw that as a way to empower people and to give people a voice who otherwise wouldn't have one. And throughout my life, I've really tried to do that. For instance, I ran Geauga County's CASA program. You might know about that. It provides volunteer guardians ad litem for abused and neglected children, and I was honored to work with Judge Chip Henry in that role. I went on into the healthcare field and became senior counsel at the Cleveland Clinic, went back to graduate school at the age of 52 in healthcare, and went to work at the Innovation Center at Medicare and Medicaid to help design more cost-effective, high-quality healthcare delivery systems in this country. Now, I have my own law firm, and I mainly represent workers who've been fired illegally. And when they get fired, they often lose their healthcare benefits at a time when they really need them. I also help companies grow, and having good health, human resources policies, good treatment of their employees helps them to grow and thrive. I ran for Congress in 2018, which some of you may know, but I decided in 2020 to run for the state Senate because the more I've gotten involved in politics and policy, the more I've realized that the things that are most important to us in our day-to-day lives, they happen at the state level. And a lot of times people don't pay that much attention to the state races and who represents them there. As everybody's been talking about, education. A top priority for our state legislature should be education, and that hasn't been the case with unconstitutional funding for over 2 decades. And you know, we're not talking about throwing away money needlessly. Over 2 decades ago, the Ohio Supreme Court held that we were not adequately funding education and that we were doing it in an inequitable way. That needs to be a top priority. And all we've seen recently is that they're actually taking money out of the public education system and have given it to fraudulent charter schools like ECOT, draining our schools further of what they need. Another high priority is health care. And there are things we can do at the state level. We can require that pre-existing conditions be covered. We can regulate prescription drug companies and bring down the cost of things like insulin and EpiPens and not allow price gouging of people. And what we really need to do in 2020 is elect people who will stand up for fair elections and get rid of gerrymandering. I want to sit at the table for that, and I hope you'll vote for me on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you both for your thoughtful remarks. I have a couple of questions for both of you, and one just for Mr. Serino. I'll start with the question that was directed to both of you. What is your position regarding LGBTQ equality and rights? And I'll start with you, Mr. Serino.
Sure, thank you. I know there are a number of, there is some legislation currently being considered. My view is that we all have inalienable rights as citizens in this country and of this state. I don't believe any additional legislation is necessary or required in order to protect individuals' rights, whatever their gender, race, or sexual predisposition. So I don't believe that any legislation specifically directed to that is necessary. But I do believe that we all should be protected, and we do have inalienable rights as citizens of this country and this state.
Ms. Rader.
I am a strong proponent of the Fairness Act, which in Ohio would guarantee equal rights to people who are LGBTQ. In fact, both my sons are gay. One of them is married, and I believe they have the same rights as everyone else to employment. And we know for a fact that our federal government right at this time is litigating against equal protection under the law for those individuals under Title VII. So we absolutely do need laws that set forth these rights and ensure that everyone has an opportunity to work, to marry, to thrive in this country.
Thank you both. This question is also for both of you. With global warming being an existential threat to the globe, our Earth, the state has no incentives for photovoltaics and wind generation. That was a 25-cent word. Yet gives breaks for coal generators. Is something drastically wrong here? What is your position on climate change? We'll start with you, Ms. Rader.
I believe climate change is a horrible threat to our entire world and to our children's future. And one thing that's very concerning in Ohio is that we are actually moving in the wrong direction. We just got rid, unfortunately, it's great that HB 6 protected jobs, but one thing it also did was got rid of things like energy efficiency standards. So while the rest of the world and the rest of the country is moving forward on these issues, we are going backwards. And we're not leaving it up to the free market. We're tipping the scale. We're putting our finger on the scale in favor of polluting technologies and not requiring those polluting technologies to take into account in their costs how they are affecting our environment and creating cleanup that the citizens of the state of Ohio are ultimately going to have to pay for.
Mr. Serino.
I care deeply about the environment, but I am not an alarmist, and I do not support the existential claim. The world is not going to end in 12 years, as has been proposed. If you read the Green New Deal, and I encourage you to read it, it reads like a very poorly done 7th grade term paper, okay? And actually addresses more wealth distribution and government control of utilities and other industries more than it does dealing with the climate. I think we need to be tough, and I will be tough in Columbus on laws that help protect our environment, certainly. But let's not forget that House Bill 6 provided guaranteed clean energy. Nuclear energy is 100% clean, okay? And has been proven safe, particularly with the 2 plants in Ohio. And so the best way we can make sure that all of us in Ohio have a great environment is to make sure that we are supporting, as all energy sources have been supported over the years with subsidies of some type, that we make sure that we continue to operate with clean energy until alternatives can't produce enough kilowatts to substitute.
Thank you. Okay, I have a question here on reproductive rights. Mr. Serino, can you comment on why Right to Life Ohio thought you were too conservative to have their support?
Well, my wife and I have 9 children, and we believe in reproductive rights. You have to think about that for a moment. I'm not sure why, I haven't seen the statement that you're referring to by Ohio. I'm chairman of the board of Cleveland Right to Life. I have been for 8 years. My wife and I have contributed substantially to the pro-life movement. No one can claim legitimately that I am anything but 100% pro-life. That is not something that I consider to be negotiable. I will negotiate on tax issues, on insurance laws, on environmental things and so on. Those things you have to negotiate sometimes and settle in the middle. But on the right to life issue, there is no change, there is no possible change of position for me, and I am unabashed and unashamed to take that position.
Ms. Rader, would you like to comment on that as to your own position?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at why, for instance, National Right to Life and Ohio Right to Life have had some disagreements with Mr. Serino, it involved things like opposing Medicaid expansion and opposing gay marriage, if that's what the question was about.
And basically I wanted to give you an opportunity to state your position on reproductive rights.
Yeah, I believe in women's reproductive freedoms and that women need to be allowed to make their own health care decisions. I think. And
I have to add, I believe in.
Mr. Serino,
I believe in the rights of unborn women as well.
You already had your opportunity to speak.
I think that the abortion bans in Ohio that have been proposed in the legislature are alarming. They've included no exceptions, and having represented abused children, I'm very familiar with the issue of child trafficking of young women who've been impregnated by members of their own family, and the thought that you would require a 12-year-old to continue with that sort of a pregnancy is not the way our government should be interfering in people's lives.
All right. Moving on, I have another question about rural internet. Previously, we had asked about what could be done about slow service, and this person says he's not even concerned about cost, or she, I don't know the answer, because they don't even have it. So clearly, there's an access question about internet service for rural communities specifically. What would you do about that? Ms. Rader, I'll let you start this time, and Mr. Serino second.
Yes, I have to say, I've talked, my grandfather was a dairy farmer. I live in a rural area now. And when I talk to farmers, this lack of broadband access is a huge problem in rural communities. And I think some of the people who spoke earlier said it is an excellent example of where we ought to be making infrastructure investment in the state of Ohio. And so I think that that should be really a first priority. And I don't know that it would necessarily require going into the rainy day fund, though I don't know why the rainy day fund needed to have an extra $600 million put into it last year. I think there are other things we can do. For instance, we have a ridiculous number of special interest tax loopholes in Ohio, including one that applies to opioid distributors, the same ones that are being prosecuted for illegally disseminating opioids in this state. And so I think that we need to go back and take a real hard look at special interest tax loopholes.
Thank you. Mr. Serino.
I certainly agree that access has to be made available. It should be part of our infrastructure plan. How it gets financed and what the free market, open market can do to help facilitate that. If there's a clamoring need by the public for something, usually businesses step up to the table if there's an economic case for it. And so we certainly need to make sure that that happens through one means or the other.
Okay. I have one last question for the two of you. We have heard comments about paying for all of our ills by tapping the wealthy. What is it you plan when we run out of all their dollars? Mr. Serino.
I'm not quite sure I got the whole question there. Could you repeat it?
Well, I'll repeat it and make of it what you will. We have heard comments about paying for all of our ills by taxing the wealthy. What is it you plan when we run out of all their dollars?
Well, we could talk for a long time on that one. First of all, I don't believe that the rush to tax the wealthy, which has been part of the Democratic Party's standard message for a very, very long time, as long as I can remember. We don't want to tap out and be negative against the job creators. Business owners and wealthier people create jobs, and that creates a great domino effect in our economy, which has gotten us to where we are today, except for today in the stock market, certainly. But, economic growth happens because capital gets put at risk. And if there's an adequate reward for capital put at risk, people invest. And without investments, and if investments are actually penalized through higher taxes or wealth taxes, we are not going to see a sustained economy like we have seen in the last several years. And that is good for everybody.
Okay. Ms. Rader.
Well, I think that, when I hear people, business owners in Ohio, talk about what's holding them back from growing, what I hear is that we have jobs. What we don't have is the people to fill those jobs. We don't have people with the skills. We don't have people who can pass the drug tests. And so we have to invest in our people. So let's talk about where you get the money for that. Again, I take you back to Ohio's upside-down tax system that has an extraordinary number compared to other states of special interest tax loopholes. Richard Dana earlier referred to one. There's the LLC tax loophole, $1 billion a year that costs Ohio and state income taxes. And it's been demonstrated that it is not creating jobs. What it is it's a boondoggle that applies to lobbyists, it applies to a lot of lawyers, and it means that if you incorporate as an LLC, even if you don't employ a single person, you get no state income taxes on your first $250,000. We can take a hard look at those sorts of tax loopholes to fund things like investment in education and broadband.
Great. Thank you. I would like to thank both of you for your thoughtful and educational remarks. Appreciate that. If you would like to exit this way so we avoid a traffic jam, thank you.
To have the privilege of having the job of making the roads safe, that's rewarding for me. Getting through a storm and seeing the final product of what you've done. It's something I take pride in, and because of it being a challenge, it's something I enjoy doing.